Hello, I'm Tom Kimmel. This is part two of a two-part presentation in which I lay out the reasons to support the advancement of Rear Admiral Kimmel on the retired list. It's actually a graphic presentation of a paper by the same title that I wrote and attached to my Bureau for Correction of Naval Records application in the Rear Admiral Husband Kimmel advancement matter. In the first part, I laid out the support expressed by the giants of World War II, Nimitz, Halsey, King, Spruance, Kincaid, Berg, and a host of others. That covered part one. In part two, I will cover reasons 2, 3, 4, and 5 listed here. The 6 former chiefs of naval operations who have expressed support in writing. I'll discuss the Naval Court of Inquiry, the only tribunal that accorded Admiral Kimmel the opportunity to defend himself. And then I will discuss the new information since 1946, which incidentally, most of it was not even known to Admiral Kimmel ever, and a lot of it not known to any of the investigators. Anyway, it further justifies the action requested. And finally, I'll discuss the posthumous advancement, the relief requested, the modest nature of it, and the importance of it. So, let's get started. Reason 2 that I provide in my reasons to advance Kimmel on the retired list is that 6 former chiefs of naval operations, 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a director of Central Intelligence, Trost, Burke, Turner, Moore, Crow, Holloway, Zumwalt, Hayward, in addition to 26 other 4-star admirals, have supported this action calling for advancement posthumously of Rear Admiral Kimmel and General Short in this case. They've called for this support in writing, and here actually is the writing. For a complete list of 4-star supporters, you really should visit my website at www.pearlharbor911attacks.com. Here is a list of the signatories of the support letter, the 1991 support letter to President Bush 41. Incidentally, it was updated in 2005 at the request of the former Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral James Ace Lyons, as you can see in the lower left corner of the signatory page. He requested in 2006 that he be included as a signatory. And of course, the former chiefs of naval operations, the director of Central Intelligence, and one head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are all pictured below there. Okay, reason 3. Reason 3. Terribly important. Only one of the 10 tribunals that investigated the attack accorded Admiral Kimmel the opportunity to call and to cross-examine witnesses. That is, to defend himself. The Naval Court of Inquiry. That's the only one who allowed Admiral Kimmel to defend himself. Accordingly, the Naval Court of Inquiry found, first, that there was not a scintilla of evidence to support a charge of dereliction of duty against Admiral Kimmel. They found that Admiral Kimmel committed no errors of judgment. Let me say that again. The Naval Court of Inquiry found that Admiral Kimmel committed no errors of judgment. They also approved all of Admiral Kimmel's force dispositions, claiming that they were appropriate on the basis of information that he was given. The president of the court, Admiral Murfin, opined that they thought on the court that Admiral Kimmel had done everything possible under the circumstances. And of course, lastly, the Naval Court severely criticized Admiral Kimmel's only uniformed boss in the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Stark, for not keeping Kimmel properly informed. The Navy Department refused to release the court's findings. Let me say that again. After exonerating Kimmel, the Navy Department refused to release the court's findings. In short, the Navy Department, under its then leadership, deliberately deprived Admiral Kimmel of the vindication to which its own formal process entitled him. Reason number 4. There's abundant new information since 1946, most never known to Rear Admiral Kimmel or to investigators, that further justifies this action. And much of this new information was discovered by authors Anthony Summers and his wife Robin Swan in a November 2016 published book called A Matter of Honor, Pearl Harbor, Betrayal, Blame, and a Family's Quest for Justice. Consider some of what's newly revealed in Summers and Swan's 2016 book. Well, number 1, how false testimony and false evidence provided to investigators did Admiral Kimmel and General Short irreparable prejudice. Providers of false information, as officers and decent human beings, knowing full well what they had done, had an obligation to rectify the prejudice to Kimmel and Short from such deplorable misinformation. They did not do so. In my view, that alone should be enough to compel the relief sought, posthumous advancement of Kimmel on the retired list. Consider what else is newly revealed in Summers and Swan's book. Well, how's this? How magic was discussed freely with the Roberts Commission in 1941, when an impression could be left that Kimmel and Short had magic. Once again, magic was the code name for the secret decoding of Japanese diplomatic and spy communication, which gave us, prior to the Pearl Harbor attack, indications of the time, place, reason, and deceit plan to cover the attack. When an impression could be left that Kimmel and Short had magic, it was discussed freely with the Roberts Commission in 1941. But in 1944, when that was no longer possible, the Navy and War Departments declared that magic could not be discussed with the Naval Court of Inquiry or the Army Pearl Harbor Board. Some more from Summers and Swan's book. How Admiral Kimmel came to be the only qualified officer in World War II, the only qualified flag officer, I beg your pardon, in other words, the only admiral, in World War II not advanced under the Officer Personnel Act of 1947. Well, what we found is that the Chief of Naval Personnel, Vice Admiral James Holloway, Jr., recommended advancement of Kimmel in his April 1954 memorandum. Admiral Holloway noted that in 1948, the Navy Department merely omitted the name of Admiral Kimmel from the list of flag officers whose promotion was authorized. That would be everybody else, everyone else. This was done without any reference to Kimmel's or anyone's performance, constituting a belated special disciplinary action of a punitive kind taken without notice to the officer specifically singled out by such omission, Admiral Kimmel. Additional new information in Summers and Swan's book. How the Navy Department misled Kimmel regarding the known threat from air-dropped shallow water torpedoes. Kimmel often complained that he was affirmatively misled. We'll cover a most egregious example of that. We continue. How the Navy Department misled Kimmel again, and then affirmatively misled Kimmel regarding available spy reports. How the Navy Department affirmatively misled Kimmel regarding the November 26, 1941 American note or ultimatum to Japan, if you prefer. A copy of the joint memo was sent to Kimmel, but no follow-up advising him that FDR ignored the head of the Army and the head of the Navy's primary recommendation that no ultimatum be sent. We'll also take a look at how Admiral Kimmel was manipulated into retirement. This is brand new information, only made public for the first time in Summers and Swan's book. And we'll also cover how perjury before the Naval Court of Inquiry was even worse than perjury before the Army Pearl Harbor Board. Again, brand new information, only discovered and published in Summers and Swan's 2016 book. Okay, let's get to the short strokes here. Summers and Swan reveal how Kimmel was affirmatively misled by the Navy Department in many ways. This was most certainly one of them. Why did Kimmel not realize how vulnerable the fleet was in Pearl Harbor? Because of this torpedo business. His words, this torpedo business. Well, Kimmel was affirmatively misled by Chief of Naval Operations Stark in February and June of 1941, when he was told that British aircraft torpedoes dropped on the Italian fleet at Taranto in November of 1940 were dropped in 84 feet and 66 feet of water, respectively, or more. The depth of water in Pearl Harbor is 30 feet generally and 42 feet in the channel. That's why Kimmel did not realize how vulnerable the fleet was in Pearl Harbor, because of, as he put it, this torpedo business. Summers and Swan analyzed this torpedo business. Here's a summary of it. On June 9th, 1941, on January 9th, 1941, even before Admiral Kimmel took over as Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, the Office of Naval Intelligence received Lieutenant Commander John Oppy's Taranto raid chart. Kimmel was not told about this, nor was any Pearl Harbor investigation told. In February of 1941, Kimmel was told by his Chief of Naval Operations Stark in an official dispatch that torpedoes were airdropped in 84 feet of water or more at Taranto. In June of 1941, Kimmel was sent another official dispatch, this time by Admiral Stark's assistant, Admiral Ingersoll, that upon further review, torpedoes were airdropped in 66 feet of water or more at Taranto. Later in June of 1941, the Navy Department was told that torpedoes were airdropped in 42 feet of water at Dakar. That's Mirs El Kabur. This is the attack by the British on the French fleet at Dakar. Kimmel was not told of this, nor was the Navy Court of Inquiry told. That's why the Naval Court of Inquiry mistakenly styled Japanese shallow water airdrop torpedoes as a secret weapon unknown to any other Navy in the world at that time. It was unknown to the Naval Court of Inquiry and to Admiral Kimmel, but not unknown to the Navy Department in Washington, D.C. Of course, things get worse. In July of 1941, the Navy Department was told in an official report that British torpedoes could be successfully airdropped in 24 feet of water. Kimmel was not told this, nor was any Pearl Harbor investigation told this. Summers and Swan discovered that Lieutenant Commander John Oppie, United States Navy, was a United States Navy observer on HMS Illustrious, the aircraft carrier that attacked the Italian fleet at Taranto, November 11th, 1940. The Conte de Cavour battleship, Italian battleship, was sunk. 2 others were put out of action for many months. Lieutenant Commander Oppie's report arrived at the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C. on January 9, 1941. Attached to Commander Oppie's report was this post-attack chart. Clusters of T symbols show where the British dropped torpedoes. The chart also shows the depths of water in those areas. The torpedoes marked on the chart at a position that lines up with the battleship Conte de Cavour were dropped at a point at which most depths were identified as being only about 4 fathoms. That's 24 feet. Lieutenant Commander Oppie, who had himself briefly served at Pearl Harbor, felt that his knowledge of the Taranto attack was very relevant, to say the least. In mid-January 1941, as his stint in the Mediterranean was coming to an end, he sent in a suggestion. "I honestly feel," he wrote, "that I should fly to Hawaii and talk to the boys there on my war experiences and how to train to meet the lessons learned." No one took him up on the proposal. A week after Stark's deputy's letter went off, headquarters received a report from England with intelligence on another of the British attacks of the previous year. In the attack on the French fleet Richelieu at Dakar, that's Mirs El Khabur, the report noted the water depth had been only 7 fathoms, 42 feet. Receipt of that information alone would have surely have alerted Admiral Kimmel and his aides at Pearl Harbor and caused them to reevaluate the possible risk at Pearl. A Navy review of the files conducted later, however, would note that there was no indication that that document was sent to the Pacific Fleet. Summers and Swan provided a clearer look at the Taranto chart attached to Oppie's report of the attack and received in the Office of Naval Intelligence in January 1941. On the chart, you can see 2 T's, double T's, indicating a torpedo drop. The chart itself is marked with depths in fathoms. It shows at least one of the torpedoes going down in a spot where depths were recorded as 3 to 3 3/4 fathoms. That would be 18 to 24 feet. Summers and Swan also found that Kimmel was misled by the Navy Department regarding available spy reports. This is one of 3 available spy reports not sent to Admiral Kimmel. Captain Ulrich von der Osten and his colleague Kurt Friedrich Ludwig were German spies. On March 18, 1941, Ober Officer Captain Ulrich von der Osten was killed in Times Square, New York. His partner Ludwig fled with Osteen's briefcase. The FBI found in Osteen's apartment Osteens Report on defenses at Pearl Harbor, with Osteen's comment that this will be of interest mostly to our yellow allies. In pertinent part, the report said, Navy, said to be stationed in Pearl Harbor and rest of islands, 150 units of all kinds. Seen in harbor about 50 vessels, at least 5 armored ships, big battleships, Saratoga and other, very small aircraft carrier, The last one outside of harbor. Other big one besides Saratoga, said to be there. Seen several units of destroyers, each 4 of them tied to the other. Slightly higher, outmoded looking ship. Seen destroyers, hull numbers 372, 383, 374, 375. Couldn't read other numbers. One dry dock, 1,000-foot stationary. Other swimming dry dock of same length, said arrived recently. Along east side of the harbor, near the submarine station, about 80 fuel tanks. This will be of interest mostly to our yellow allies. Are you interested? Might be a good idea to dispatch an observer if you are. Want me to find somebody? This information was never sent to Admiral Kimmel, nor was it even sent to the FBI in Honolulu. Here's a second available spy report in July 1941. Admiral Lockwoods, former attaché in London, his intelligence report, revealed that the British could successfully airdrop torpedoes in water as shallow as 4 fathoms. Of course, the vast majority of damage at Pearl Harbor was inflicted by airdrop torpedoes. Indeed, without successfully overcoming the problem of dropping torpedoes from the air into shallow water, the attack on Pearl Harbor probably would never have been made. Lockwoods' report was not sent to Hawaii, nor was it revealed to the Joint Congressional Committee, nor any other investigation of Pearl Harbor. It wasn't even declassified until 1998. Admiral Kimmel testified to the Joint Congressional Committee. The primary thing we had in mind all the time was to be ready for offensive action. I never believed that an air attack on Pearl Harbor would result in destruction of the fleet. I was firmly convinced at the time that torpedoes would not run in the waters of Pearl Harbor. And if it had not been for the destruction accomplished by the torpedoes at that time, the damage would have been comparatively negligible. Here's a third example of a spy report available in August 1941 and not sent to Kimmel. It is my contention, ladies and gentlemen, that if Popoff's spy questionnaire asking for water depth and torpedo net use at Pearl Harbor had been sent to Kimmel, which it wasn't, Pearl Harbor investigators would have bludgeoned him with it. But of course, Popoff's spy questionnaire was kept secret from all Pearl Harbor investigations. Admiral Kimmel never had any idea this information was available. He deceased in 1968. Another example that Summers and Swan found was that Kimmel was misled by the Navy Department regarding the November 26, 1941 American Note. That American Note was a joint memo, in a joint memo by the head of the Army and the head of the Navy on November 5, 1941. The Chief of Naval Operations and the Chief of Staff of the Army, writing to the President of the United States, said that they were jointly in accord in the following conclusions. Specifically, they recommended that no ultimatum be delivered to Japan. Well, why is that important to Kimmel? Well, it's important to Kimmel because Admiral Stark actually sent Kimmel a copy of his joint memo with Marshall. They sent it to Kimmel on November 14, 1941. He received it on November 20th, 1941. But what Admiral Stark failed to do was to tell Admiral Kimmel that the President of the United States ignored the recommendation of Marshall and Stark not to send an ultimatum to Japan by sending one on November 26, 1941. That was never conveyed to Admiral Kimmel, that FDR ignored Marshall and Stark's advice and sent an ultimatum to Japan. Admiral Kimmel had been promised on multiple occasions that he would be sent all the information that bore upon his problem in the Pacific. Accordingly, he thought he was receiving such information, and clearly he wasn't. Summers and Swan revealed how Admiral Kimmel was manipulated into retirement. This little memo 3 days after the Roberts Commission from General Marshall to the Secretary of the War, Stimson, certainly lays out the plan. Marshall had received a request for retirement of General Short to be used as General Marshall saw fit. General Marshall, writing to the Secretary of the War 3 days after the Roberts Commission, is recommending that we should accept General Short's application for retirement today. Do this quietly, without any publicity. Admiral Stark has requested me to advise him if we do this, as he proposes to communicate this fact to Admiral Kimmel in the hope that Kimmel will likewise apply for retirement. And of course, as an aside, explained in this memo from Marshall, is that Marshall, Secretary of War Stimson, and the Judge Advocate General were all basically in agreement by claiming that the Roberts Commission was on a plane above that of the Naval Court of Inquiry, and therefore rendered the Naval Court of Inquiry unnecessary. And if anybody requested a Naval Court of Inquiry, we could refuse it. Adding to this manipulation of Kimmel into retirement was this newly discovered telephone transcript. Amazingly, they were able to find this transcript. It was in the Nimitz papers at the Naval Heritage and History Command. Admiral Jacobs, who was the chief of the department dealing with personnel matters, on the transcript, talking to Admiral Greenslade, the commandant in San Francisco, where Kimmel was, pending assignment. Admiral Jacobs asked Greenslade, "Has Kimmel returned yet?" Greenslade, "Yes, he's here." Jacobs, Admiral Jacobs, "I've just been discussing the matter with Admiral Stark, and they want Kimmel kept in a leave status until further disposition is made of the report. I was asked by Admiral Stark to inform you to tell Kimmel that General Short has applied for retirement." Greenslade, in disbelief, responds, "In leave status? You want me to tell him that?" Jacobs, "Yes." Admiral Kimmel was stunned, had no intention of retiring, saw what the Navy Department wanted him to do, decided he would accept their decision, but in his retirement request made it abundantly clear this is not what he wanted, and that he was more than willing to accept any further assignment that the Navy Department was willing to give him. Summers and Swan expanded on Admiral Smedberg's 1981 information. Admiral Smedberg, at the time of Pearl Harbor, was one of 7 naval aides to Admiral Stark. It's long been known that Stark and Marshall perjured themselves before the Naval Court of Inquiry, and the Army Pearl Harbor Board, respectively. But this is brand new information, only revealed in Summers and Swan's November 2016 published book. And here is the story. Admiral Smedberg wrote a reminiscence in 1981, which was published by the Naval Institute Press in a compilation called Air Raid Pearl Harbor, with Paul Stillwell making the compilation. Admiral Smedberg held forth in 1981 as follows. I, Admiral Smedberg, kept a wax cylinder record of everything President Roosevelt said to Admiral Stark. The President would call up and say, Betty, a nickname for Admiral Stark, I want this done right away. And he'd give 5 or 6 things in rapid fire order. Admiral Stark would say, yes, Mr. President, yes, Mr. President, yes, Mr. President. Have you got that, Betty? Yes, Mr. President. And he'd hang up. The buzzer would ring in my office, and I'd go in to hear Admiral Stark say, did you get all that, Smetty? Yes, sir, I would say. Well, get going on it. I, Admiral Smedberg, then Commander Smedberg, monitored nearly every conversation Admiral Stark had, and I made a record of almost all of them. Every now and then, when it was a personal thing, Admiral Stark would tell me to destroy the record. Okay, this has been known since 1981. So what's new? Here's what's new. Summers and Swan discovered testimony of Admiral Stark to the Naval Court of Inquiry in 1944, reflecting directly on Admiral Smedberg's wiretap of Admiral Stark's phone. Naval Court of Inquiry question number 388. Question: did you, Admiral Stark, ever keep any record of your conversations with the President during the year 1941? Admiral Stark's answer: no, I did not. New extraordinary information. On my website, listed there, pearlharbor911attacks.com, are 3 memorandum and several videos by Michael Gannon, author of Pearl Harbor Betrayed, the true story of a man and a nation under attack, which set forth 3 examples of extraordinary new evidence, which, each standing alone, more than justifies overturning decisions made more than 75 years ago. Professor Gannon's 3 memorandum are listed before you. Here's an example of Professor Gannon on video.
Well, this seemed to be a devastating criticism of Admiral Kimmel. If he had such a clear warning in front of him that any attack would come from a specific sector, he should have done everything he could to guard that sector. But 2 things must be said about that. First, Admiral Kimmel believed, and Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, his replacement afterwards, similarly agreed with this, that any search worth its name must be 360 degrees in breadth. And as for the Martin Bellinger report, that was a report that was compiled and given to Admiral Kimmel on March 31, 1941 by Major General Frederick Martin and Rear Admiral Patrick Bellinger. Martin commanded the U.S. Army Air Corps on the island, and Patrick Bellinger was commander of all of the patrol aircraft. After I read that damning statement in the book by Gordon W. Prang and Donald M. Goldstein, I went to the library of the University of Florida and looked through the massive collection of documents that recount the Pearl Harbor hearings conducted from 1941 to 1945 in one form or another. And all of the collected documents that were used by the various hearing bodies are in that collection. And I found the Martin Bellinger report in 4 different places in that collection. And I read the first account I discovered avidly to find where this warning was given. And it was not there. There was nothing in the Martin Bellinger report about the northern sector being the most dangerous sector. There was nothing about any sector being more dangerous than any other. The word north does not even appear in the document, nor does any numerical or nautical equivalent. These people, Prang and Goldstein, had lied, and so baldly that I wondered why it hadn't been picked up in the years intervening between 1986 and the year 1999 when I discovered this. It was quite an extraordinary bit of misinformation that has, of course, led many people astray in understanding the whole Pearl Harbor story. In 2001, which was the 60th anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, I attended a conference in Honolulu put on by the National Park Service, to which many historians of the Pearl Harbor attack had been invited, one of them, Donald Goldstein. And when it came my time to speak, I confronted him with the document. I went through all 4 of the documents as they were collected in the hearings volumes, and they were all identical. So I held up a copy of the Martin Bellinger report, and I said, Dr. Goldstein, there is nothing in this report that states that the northern sector or any other sector was more dangerous than any others. Why did you make the statement that you did in your book, Pearl Harbor, The Verdict of History? And he made no reply. He chuckled and laughed it off. And I said, it's only 7 pages long. It wouldn't take you long to read it at all. I have it here for you to read. And he chuckled it off, and the audience, I must say, chuckled with him. And so I tried to make the point then, and I'm trying to make the point here once more, that Admiral Kimmel was never given such a warning, and he is not guilty as charged.
Okay, it's time now for reason number 5. The requested relief, posthumous advancement, is modest, but serves to overcome the last official stigma on this honorable man. Admiral Kimmel is the only naval officer otherwise qualified under the Officer Personnel Act of 1947 not to receive its benefits. Retirement at his highest temporary rank in World War II. The Dorn Report argues that using advancement or promotion to compensate for harsh treatment in the media as a form of official apology or as a symbolic act would be manifestly unfair to those who earned advancement based on performance and would imply a double standard for advancement in the armed services. The highest retired grades to which an officer may aspire should not be conferred on anyone as an apology. Rather, those grades should be reserved for those officers whose performance stands out above the others. I was quoting from the Dorn Report. Well, apparently the Dorn Committee investigators were not aware of the following 3 Army major generals that were allowed to retire at their highest held temporary ranks achieved in World War II in accordance with provisions of the Officer Personnel Act of 1947 in spite of performance. Consider Major General John Lucas at Anzio. Lucas's superiors expected some kind of offensive action from him at Anzio. Lucas instead strengthened his defenses. Historian John Keegan. Lucas's actions achieved the worst of both worlds, exposing his forces to risk while without imposing any on the enemy. Lucas was relieved for cause by General Lucian Truscott. This is my favorite example, Major General Henry Miller at Claridge's Hotel in London. 7 weeks before D-Day, General Miller, a member of General Spaat's Army Air Corps staff, had gotten drunk at a nightclub in London and had proceeded to take bets that the D-Day invasion would occur before June 15th. General Spaatz, beside himself, placed Miller under house arrest. General Eisenhower, even worse, demoted Miller to colonel on the spot and returned him to the United States. A third example is General Friedenthal at Kasserine Pass. Friedenthal proved to be utterly incompetent, remaining in his headquarters some 80 miles from the front and failing even once to visit the front lines prior to the German attack. Friedenthal was relieved and replaced by General Patton. Kasserine Pass cost the Germans 2,000 men and the Allies 10,000, of which 6,500 were Americans. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes part 2 of my reasons to support the advancement of Rear Admiral Kimmel posthumously on the retired list. Thank you very much for your kind attention.